A woman can be called unstable by the same machine that trusts her to make millions. Britney Spears was sold as freedom while her real life was being controlled on paper. The public saw the pop princess, smiling, rehearsed, precise, filling arenas, and later carrying a Las Vegas residency that turned her name into a business. But inside the conservatorship, Britney said she could not control her work, her body, or the medication placed in her life. That is the part the brand could not admit. She was still performing for millions, but fighting to be heard as a person. Who kept earning while Britney kept losing control over herself? This is Hollywood Dark Secrets, where we ask what really happened to Britney Spears. By 1998, Britney Spears was not simply being introduced as a new pop singer. She was being sold as a contradiction. She was young enough for parents to call her harmless, polished enough for executives to call her bankable, disciplined enough for choreographers to build a stage image around, and provocative enough for magazines and television hosts to keep asking questions they should never have aimed at a teenage girl. That contradiction became the engine. It turned one young performer from Louisiana into a global product before she had enough power to control what that product meant. The Baby One More Time video looked clean at first glance. A school hallway, a bell, a line of students, a teenage girl in uniform, dancing with perfect timing, looking directly into the camera with a mix of innocence and confidence that the industry immediately understood. The image was not accidental. Britney later said she pushed for the schoolgirl idea after an earlier concept did not feel right to her. That detail matters because it shows something complicated from the beginning. She was not a puppet with no instincts. She had taste. She had ideas. She understood performance. But once the image worked, the industry took it and made it bigger than her. The video sold a fantasy that could be read in two ways at once. To young fans, it looked like energy, school, crushes, dance, rebellion, and fun. To adults, the camera made the image harder to ignore. The label did not need to explain the formula. The sales did that. The single moved. The album moved. MTV moved her image through living rooms, malls, bedrooms, stores, and television screens until Britney Spears became more than a singer. She became a visual language, a ponytail, a uniform, a midriff, a smile, a wink, a carefully packaged version of teenage freedom. But freedom was already the wrong word. A free person can change shape without being punished for it. A free person can say no without being called difficult. A free person can be young without having her body turned into a public question. Britney's early image was sold as freedom, but it came with strict conditions. Be playful, but not too adult. Be desirable, but still clean. Be confident, but never threatening. Be innocent, but interesting enough to sell magazines. Every public appearance became a test of how tightly she could hold two opposite ideas at the same time. The interviews from those years now look colder than they did when they aired. Grown hosts asked about her virginity. Reporters asked about her body. Men on television spoke as if her physical development belonged to the audience. The questions were framed as playful, but they were not harmless. They trained the public to believe Britney's body was open for inspection. They taught viewers that she could be discussed like a product while still being expected to smile like a polite girl. That is not a small detail. It is the early blueprint of the whole case. The culture demanded that she mature in public, then punished her for showing any sign of adulthood. It wanted the sales of desire and the comfort of purity at the same time. It wanted a young woman who could fill arenas and still behave as if the public had a right to check her moral temperature. Britney was not only singing songs, she was being forced to perform a category, the good girl who made adults keep looking, but could never openly own the attention that made her profitable. That double standard followed her into every stage of fame. When she danced with precision, she was a phenomenon. When she controlled a stage, she was a product. When she showed skin, she was provocative. When she asked for privacy, she was ungrateful. When she dated, she was a public puzzle. When she made mistakes, those mistakes were not treated as ordinary young adulthood. They were turned into evidence that the public had been tricked. That is how the structure began. Not with a court order, not with a conservatorship. It began with the industry teaching everyone to treat Britney Spears as something they could inspect, judge, and sell. The label sold the image. Television tested the girl inside it. Magazines flattened her into a headline. The audience learned to feel entitled to her. Before anyone controlled her life on paper, the culture had already practiced controlling the meaning of her body and her choices. By the early 2000s, the industry had another clean story to sell. Britney Spears and Justin Timberlake as the perfect pop couple. They were young, famous, attractive, and easy to package. Award shows loved them. Teen magazines loved them. Red carpets loved them. Their matching denim became a permanent image because it looked both innocent and absurdly famous at the same time. The public did not only watch the relationship, it consumed it. They were not treated like two young people trying to figure out love under impossible attention. They were treated like a brand extension. In her memoir, Britney wrote that she became pregnant while dating Timberlake and that he did not want to become a father at that time. She described that decision as painful and isolating. This detail should be handled carefully because it comes from her own account, not from a courtroom deciding every emotional fact. But it matters because it shows the gap between the public romance and the private cost. The world was being sold a clean pop love story. Behind that image, according to Britney, she was carrying a decision that affected her body, her future, and her sense of self. The point is not to turn that chapter into a one-note villain story. The point is to show how quickly private pain became public material. Britney's purity had already been made into public property. Her body had already been questioned on television. Her relationship had already been packaged for consumption. When that relationship ended, the public did not wait for truth. It waited for a story it could understand quickly. Cry Me a River gave the public that story. The video included a woman who looked enough like Britney for the message to land. It gave viewers a simple frame. Justin looked wounded. Britney was positioned as the one who had caused the pain, and the breakup had one visible villain. That frame was useful. It turned private pain into a marketing vehicle. It turned speculation into a soundtrack. It gave the public permission to judge her without knowing the full relationship. Britney later wrote about how painful that period felt from her side. The larger point is clear. One person's version became the public version because the industry had the tools to make it louder. The Diane Sawyer interview in 2003 made that public trial look respectable. This was not a parking lot tabloid chase. It was a mainstream television interview. The set was controlled. The tone was serious. The questions carried the weight of adult authority. A private breakup became a public moral examination. And Britney had to sit there while the country watched her answer for a story that had already been shaped against her. She looked young. She looked cornered. And the interview treated that discomfort as content. That moment matters because it shows how mainstream media helped build the later narrative. The tabloids were not alone. Respectable outlets also taught the audience that Britney's private life could be pulled apart in public. Her tears could be televised. Her answers could be judged. Her silence could be read as guilt. Her confusion could be turned into proof that she did not understand her own story. The press did not simply cover the pop star. It helped train the public how to look at her. The more famous Britney became, the less room she had to be ordinary. A regular young woman can have a breakup, a bad day, a strange outfit, a tense family moment, a mistake, a private argument, or a tired face without the world treating it as a diagnosis. Britney did not get that protection. Every detail became material. Every public moment was available for inspection. The industry had first sold a clean version of her, then turned any sign of pain into evidence that the image had failed. By the mid-2000s, the paparazzi economy around Britney had become its own business. The cameras were not only at premieres or award shows. They were outside restaurants, gas stations, hotels, courts, homes, and cars. They waited for her with the patience of people who knew distress could be sold. A calm image was worth something. A distressed image was worth more. That incentive changed the way she was followed. The photographers did not only record pressure, they created it. A photograph of a cornered Britney could move through magazines, television panels, entertainment blogs, and gossip shows in hours. The public would see the final image, not the minutes before it. They would see her face, not the crowd. They would see the reaction, not the pursuit. That missing context became the business model. Push close enough, wait long enough, make the person react, then sell the reaction as proof that the person deserved to be pushed. Britney was also a mother in the middle of this. That detail often gets swallowed by the spectacle. She was not only a pop star leaving clubs or restaurants. She was a young mother trying to move through public space while cameras crowded her car and shouted around her children. Custody pressure, new motherhood, legal pressure, public judgment, and constant surveillance all collided in front of people who were being paid to photograph the collision. That is why the old breakdown narrative was too simple. It showed the public the visible crack and hid the pressure around it. It turned human distress into a series. New day, new photo, new clip, new headline, new joke. The public did not need to understand what was happening. It only needed the next installment. Then came February 2007. The shaved head became one of the most replayed celebrity images of modern pop culture. The tabloids treated it as if the meaning were obvious. They called it collapse. They called it proof. They called it spectacle. But another reading is more human. Britney reportedly told the salon owner she was tired of people touching her. After years of stylists, handlers, photographers, managers, journalists, and strangers treating her body as a shared property, she took control of the one surface everyone kept trying to manage. That does not mean the moment should be romanticized. It was public distress. It was raw. It was not a clean empowerment scene. But it was also not the simple punchline the media sold. It was a boundary written on the body. She removed the hair that had been part of the product. She disrupted the image. She made herself harder to package for a moment, and the tabloids punished her for it immediately. A few days later, the green umbrella became another permanent image. Again, the public saw the object and not the pressure around it. The footage was easy to mock because it was easy to isolate. A woman, a car, a photographer, an umbrella. But the context was a custody fight, relentless surveillance, public exhaustion, and a crowd of cameras that had been rewarded for getting close enough to trigger a response. The media used the moment as one more piece of evidence that Britney was out of control. The harder question was this: how many people had to keep pressing before that image could be sold? Those two images became part of the cultural file against her. The shaved head, the umbrella, the late-night photos, the crying, the car scenes, the court scenes. The public began to see a woman losing control, but many people still did not ask who had been making money from the loss of control. During this same period, Britney made Blackout. That album is crucial because it breaks the simple story. If the media wanted Britney to be only chaos, Blackout complicated that. The music was sharp, cold, club-ready, and aware of being watched. It turned surveillance, desire, control, and exhaustion into sound. It was not a neat personal confession, but it carried the air of those years. The public was calling her broken while she was still making work that would later be treated as one of her most influential albums. That contradiction matters. Struggle does not erase intelligence. Distress does not erase taste. A person can be under pressure and still understand the pressure. Britney was not only the woman in the paparazzi photos, she was also the artist in the studio, building sound out of the same culture that was trying to reduce her to a warning sign. The business around her preferred the warning sign. Warning signs are easier to control. By early 2008, the public had been prepared to accept a legal solution. Britney was placed under a court-approved conservatorship in California. What had been a tabloid narrative now became paperwork. The crisis was no longer only entertainment. It had become a legal structure. Her father, Jamie Spears, became a central figure in the conservatorship. The arrangement was presented as protective. That word matters. Protection sounds like care. It sounds like family. It sounds like someone stepping in when life has become unmanageable. But protection becomes something else when the person under protection cannot freely leave it, challenge it, or control basic parts of her own life. This is where the Britney story becomes bigger than celebrity scandal. A scandal burns hot and moves on. The conservatorship lasted for years. It organized daily life. It touched money, work, medical decisions, legal choices, access, and personal autonomy. The public had been trained to believe Britney needed control. Then the legal system gave that belief a structure. But the contradiction was visible from the beginning. Britney was restricted enough to be placed under court control, yet still valuable enough to work. She released music. She appeared in projects. She toured. She performed. She later carried a Las Vegas residency that became a major business. The public saw a functioning performer, while the legal arrangement suggested she could not fully function as an independent adult. How could a system treat a woman as too limited to control major parts of her life, yet capable enough to carry albums, tours, promotional cycles, and a Vegas residency? That question never went away. It only became harder to ignore. In 2008, her album, Circus arrived with an image of recovery. The title itself felt like a public answer. The spectacle was back. The choreography was back. The brand looked repaired. The industry knew how to sell a comeback. Brighter lighting, tighter choreography, controlled interviews, a storyline of restoration. Britney's brand could be rebuilt, and the public was ready to buy the rebuilt version because it was easier than asking what the legal arrangement actually meant. The restored image did not necessarily mean restored autonomy. That is the cold part. The public can mistake polish for freedom. A person can be styled, rehearsed, lit, and choreographed while still lacking control off stage. The more polished Britney looked, the easier it became for people to assume everything was fine. But later, in her testimony, she described a very different reality. She said she was not free to control major choices. She said she felt forced to work. She said she wanted basic choices over her body and future. The Piece of Me residency in Las Vegas turned that contradiction into a nightly business model. The show was marketed as a celebration of Britney's legacy. Fans flew in, tickets sold. The residency became one of the most successful of its kind. It gave Vegas a steady pop spectacle. It gave audiences nostalgia, choreography, hits, costumes, lights, and a version of Britney that looked available again. The brand was functioning beautifully. But if the person performing did not have full power to say no, then the spectacle meant something else too. Britney Spears spent years performing freedom while living inside a structure that kept narrowing it. That is the line the public should sit with. She was singing about control, desire, escape, and performance, while her own life was subject to court oversight. She smiled inside a show called Piece of Me, while pieces of her life were being managed by others. Audiences were not wrong to love the music. Fans were not wrong to want to see her. But the business behind the show deserves scrutiny because the money kept moving. The residency reportedly grossed over $100 million and sold hundreds of thousands of tickets. The numbers made the arrangement look successful. But success for whom? That is the question the old coverage did not ask enough. If Britney was the one generating the value, who decided how the value was used? Who had access? Who got paid? Who had authority? Who could approve or deny her choices? Who could say the business had to keep running? Those questions became sharper after her public testimony. Britney said she wanted to remove an IUD and have another child, but the conservatorship would not allow it. She said she had been placed on lithium against her wishes after resisting parts of her work schedule. She said she felt forced to perform. These claims came from her testimony, and they should be treated as her testimony, not softened into vague rumor or exaggerated beyond what she said. But even stated carefully, they are severe. They move the conversation from celebrity management into bodily autonomy, medical control, and the limits of court-approved power. The IUD detail was especially hard for the public to ignore. It took the conservatorship out of paperwork and placed it inside the body. It made the question simple and disturbing. What does protection mean if a woman says she cannot make decisions about having another child? What does care mean if the person receiving care says she is trapped by it? The lithium detail raised another question. Britney testified that medication was used in a way she did not want. The public does not need to diagnose her to understand why that matters. The issue is not whether treatment can ever be necessary. The issue is whether a person generating enormous profit under legal control had meaningful power to challenge decisions being made about her body and mind. That distinction is important. This is not a story about mocking treatment. It is a story about control. It is a story about who gets to decide when treatment becomes pressure, when pressure becomes work discipline, and when the language of care becomes a cover for obedience. The financial side also raised questions. Reports and legal disputes later examined who benefited from the conservatorship and how money was spent. Britney was the person producing the value. Her name sold tickets. Her catalog sold nostalgia. Her face sold the comeback. Her body carried the choreography. Her labor powered the machine. That is why the question of who got paid matters. It is not gossip. It is the structure. A star can look rich from the outside and still lack control over her own money. A star can generate millions and still have to ask permission. A star can be the center of an empire and still not be treated as the owner of her own life. That is the paradox the brand could not admit. For years, fans noticed the gap. The Free Britney movement began as something many outsiders dismissed. People mocked the fans. They called them obsessive. They said they were reading too much into captions, videos, court filings, and public appearances. Some theories went too far. That happens in any large public movement. But the core question was valid. Why was this conservatorship still in place while Britney continued to work at such a high level? In 2019, the planned Domination residency in Las Vegas was canceled. The official explanation was tied to Britney Spears' health. Around that period, concern from fans intensified. An anonymous voicemail aired by the Britney's Graham podcast claimed that Britney had been placed in a facility after resisting work demands. Not every detail of that voicemail was independently proven in the moment, so it should not be treated as a court-confirmed fact. But it pushed public attention toward the same question fans had been asking for years. Was the public being shown a managed version of Britney, while something far more restrictive was happening behind the scenes? The movement grew because the old explanations no longer satisfied enough people. Fans gathered outside courthouses with signs. They read filings. They followed hearings. They kept asking why a grown woman who could work, record, rehearse, and perform still did not appear to have full control over her life. They were not simply asking for a pop star to release new music. They were asking whether the law had been used to keep a performer profitable while limiting her autonomy. What made Free Britney different was that it did not begin with an official institution. It did not come from a court spokesperson, a record label, or a polished documentary campaign. It came from people who had watched the machine for years and started noticing the gaps. They saw the difference between the star being sold and the woman being restricted. They saw a performer strong enough to rehearse, tour, record, promote, and carry a major stage, yet still living under an arrangement that treated her adult choices as something to be managed by others. That contradiction became harder to ignore. The movement also changed the role of the audience. For years, the public had been trained to consume Britney as a spectacle. Free Britney asked the public to stop only watching and start questioning. Who was speaking for her? Who had legal authority? Who was being paid? Why did the arrangement continue after the emergency years had passed? Why was work still possible if freedom was not? Those questions did not solve the case by themselves, but they changed the temperature around it. The signs outside the courthouse mattered because they turned private legal language into public pressure. Conservatorship was no longer an obscure word buried in court filings. It became part of a larger conversation about autonomy, profit, disability language, family power, and the entertainment industry's ability to hide control behind concern. For the first time in years, the story was no longer only being shaped by managers, tabloids, or official statements. A different public reading had entered the room. Then the documentaries widened the conversation. Framing Britney Spears forced many people to revisit the early media years with new eyes. The schoolgirl image, the invasive interviews, the breakup coverage, the Diane Sawyer interview, the paparazzi chase, the shaved head, the conservatorship, the fan movement. What once looked like a series of celebrity scandals now looked like a chain of public consumption and institutional control. The documentary did something the tabloids had avoided. It asked the audience to examine itself. That was uncomfortable. Many people who had laughed at the jokes, watched the clips, clicked the headlines, or accepted the unstable label had to face the possibility that they had participated in the spectacle. Not as judges or lawyers, as consumers, as viewers, as people who helped make the market valuable. That is why Free Britney changed more than Britney's case. It changed how the public reads celebrity distress. It made people ask whether a breakdown narrative can be manufactured, exaggerated, and then used to justify control. It made people more suspicious of the old tabloid logic that says, if a woman looks distressed in public, every restriction placed on her must be deserved. By June 23, 2021, the most important voice in the case finally entered the public record in a way that could not be edited by a manager, tabloid, or documentary producer. Britney addressed the court directly. Her statement lasted about 24 minutes. She said she was traumatized. She said she wanted her life back. She spoke about work, medication, therapy, her body, marriage, children, and the restrictions she said she had been living under. The force of that testimony came from a simple reversal. After years of other people speaking for her, Britney was finally speaking into the record herself. For years, people had spoken about Britney. Managers, family members, journalists, photographers, lawyers, fans, critics, hosts, documentary subjects. The court statement changed the center of gravity. The person the public had called unstable was now explaining the structure around her with clarity. She did not sound like a product being repaired. She sounded like a woman asking why her life had been managed by people who kept benefiting from her work. That testimony broke the old frame. It made the conservatorship harder to defend in soft language. Protection no longer sounded neutral when the person under the arrangement said she felt trapped by it. Care no longer sounded simple when she described work pressure and bodily restriction. The public could no longer comfortably say, maybe this is for her own good, without hearing the voice of the woman saying she wanted out. After that, the system began to move. Public pressure intensified. Legal pressure intensified. Britney obtained new legal representation. Jamie Spears was suspended from his role. On November 12, 2021, the conservatorship was terminated. The court order ended an arrangement that had shaped nearly 14 years of her life. Fans celebrated outside the courthouse. Pink signs, tears, confetti. People called it freedom, and it was. But freedom after nearly 14 years is not the same as freedom untouched. The end of the conservatorship did not hand back the years. It did not erase the work she said she had been pushed to do. It did not erase the interviews, the court hearings, the medical claims, the family damage, or the public mockery that had helped prepare the world to accept control as care. That is why the ending is not simple. The legal structure ended. The aftermath remained. Britney's memoir, The Woman in Me, gave her another form of control, her own sequence. A memoir is not the same as a court record. It is memory, perspective, and personal testimony. But for someone whose life had been narrated by other people for decades, the act of placing her own story on the page mattered. She wrote about fame, her family, her relationship with Timberlake, the pregnancy decision, motherhood, the conservatorship, and the years when the public thought it knew more than it did. The book was not just a celebrity memoir. It was a correction to a public record built by strangers. It gave Britney the chance to say what certain moments felt like from inside her own body. The schoolgirl image, the breakup narrative, the interviews, the custody pressure, the conservatorship, the feeling of being treated like a product by people who still called it love, concern, or business. That is the emotional center of the Britney story. The public kept receiving versions of her from other people. The memoir was one place where she could stop being only the object of the story and become the narrator. The aftermath also showed how difficult freedom can be when the public still feels entitled to watch. After the conservatorship ended, Britney did not become private in the way some people expected. She posted, she wrote, she danced. She spoke in ways that confused or concerned some viewers. But that reaction reveals another problem. For years, the public said it wanted her free. Then, when freedom looked messy, personal, angry, strange, or unpolished, some people began demanding a cleaner version of freedom. That is not freedom. That is another performance request. A free woman is not required to reassure strangers every day. A free woman is not required to heal in a way that looks good on a phone screen. A free woman is not required to return to the exact stage that once helped extract so much from her. Britney's life after the conservatorship can be complicated without proving that the conservatorship was justified. That distinction matters. A person can struggle after control ends. That does not mean control was right. Reports in 2026 said Britney Spears had sold rights to her music catalog. She had not publicly explained the deal in the full way tabloids might want, and reports differed on details. But the symbolic weight was clear. Her music had always been the center of the business around her. The songs built the empire. The tours expanded it. The Vegas residency kept it profitable. Her voice and image created enormous value for other people. After a life where so many people had managed the value around her work, a reported catalog sale raised the same old question in a new form. Who owns the product after the person has paid the price? Britney has also made clear at different points that she does not intend to return to the old performance machine in the same way. Whether that position changes or not, the boundary matters. The industry may want the old Britney back. The choreography, the headset, the hits, the body under bright lights, the perfect smile, the comeback headline, the nostalgia. But the person at the center may not owe the machine another tour, another residency, or another version of herself designed to make strangers comfortable. That is hard for the public, Because the public confuses access with love. Fans can love the songs and still need to accept that the person who made them is not a machine built to keep producing memory. Britney gave the world decades of performance. The harder test is whether the world can respect her when she does not perform. This is why the Britney Spears case is one of the largest system stories in modern celebrity culture. It is not one scandal. It is a chain. A teenage image sold too fast. A purity narrative used too hard. A breakup turned into public judgment. Paparazzi pressure turned into entertainment. Distress turned into evidence. Evidence turned into legal control. Legal control turned into years of managed labor. Managed labor turned into profit. Fans' suspicion turned into a movement. Testimony turned into a rupture. Freedom arrived, but late. No single villain explains all of it. That makes the story more disturbing. The structure worked because many parts of the culture had a reason to keep it working. A label could call it branding. A tabloid could call it news. A court could call it protection. A family member could call it care. A manager could call it scheduling. A ticket buyer could call it entertainment. A fan could call it concern. But inside all those words, Britney kept asking for something basic: control over her own life. The public used to look at Britney Spears and call her chaos. The harder truth is that chaos was often the label placed over a structure. It covered the contracts. It covered the court papers. It covered the money. It covered the cameras. It covered the uncomfortable question of who benefited when Britney was treated as too fragile to own her choices, but strong enough to keep earning. That contradiction should still make people uncomfortable. The pop industry knows how to make another idol. Another young face. Another rehearsed smile. Another body asked to grow up under cameras. Another performer told that pressure is normal because the sales are good. Another person turned into a public product before they have the power to decide what parts of themselves should remain private. That is why Britney's story still matters. It is not only about one woman, one family, one court, or one era of tabloids. It is about how easily entertainment can turn a human being into a business model, then act surprised when the person asks to be treated as human again. This is not the story of a star who simply fell. This is the story of a system that revealed how it works. It built a teenage fantasy, sold her body as public debate, punished her adulthood, turned distress into content, used that content to justify control, and kept profiting while calling the control protection. Documenting those scars and exposing the machinery behind them is our mission here at Hollywood Dark Secrets. We do not treat scandals as gossip. We look at the systems behind the image, the people turned into products, and the private damage hidden behind public entertainment. Subscribe, leave a comment, and tell us which Hollywood figure you want us to examine next. Because the real question is not whether Britney Spears was unstable. The real question is why so many powerful people trusted her to make millions before they trusted her to own her own life.